right, I think we can get started here. Welcome to Over the Top, Getting Over the Top, How to Build a Viable OTT Offer. So I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, give a 1 to 2 minute overview of you and your company, and then we'll take it from there. So Rob, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I'm Rob Dillon. I'm a professional panelist for streaming media. Actually, I'm digital operations manager for Tribune Broadcasting for now. We're in the middle of a merger. That's what Jonathan and I were just discussing. Handle the technical implementation for a digital team, 42 TV stations, a cable channel, a radio station, various other forward-facing websites that we've acquired along the way. Including the live streaming and the VOD relationships. So, been involved with streaming media since it wasn't called streaming media. Not the show, not the company, but the actual technology. Started with streaming radio stations back in the 90s. At one time, Radio Inc. recognized the radio station and not me as being one of the forerunners of the future, even though I was the one who implemented everything, but which included the streaming of audio over the internet, which is now ubiquitous. So,
very cool. Hey everybody, my name is Chris Hall, head of product at XUMO. We build native TV solutions for both the living room and mobile handsets. We have 160 different content streaming relationships where we aggregate VOD libraries and turn them into linear streams to power those 160 different linear channels. We have distributions into all different types of smart TVs in the market, LG being one of our flagships. And we've also expanded that native TV footprint now to T-Mobile handsets. We're partnering with T-Mobile on a Metro Play integration on their -1 screen, which I hope to get a chance to talk about a little bit during the course of the panel. We're now live in 6 different international markets. So just in the last 2 weeks, we went live with our partnership with LG. Really excited to expand it outside of the United States and Canada, off of North America. And we are completely ad supported. So we are an AVOD service. So no account to create, no subscription needed. Turn on your TV, turn on your phone, completely free, 160 channels at your disposal. Our main competitors in the space, you've probably seen Pluto all over town here in New York and in LA. We also collaborate with, but also compete with likes of the Roku channel, Amazon Freedive, and so on and so forth. So excited to talk about this space. It's exploding, and it's very exciting to be here and to talk to you all.
Hello, my name is Greg Ferris. I lead the product team at Fandango. In my role, my responsibility is overseeing the product vision and the product roadmap across all of our portfolio brands. So that includes what we do in theatrical ticketing with our Fandango brand, with Flixster, with MovieTickets.com, but also in home entertainment with Fandango Now and Movie Clips, as well as what we do with editorial and reviews through Rotten Tomatoes. If you were to look back, say 5 years ago at Fandango, I think you'd see us as primarily focused on being a utility for selling movie tickets and delivering movie tickets. But over the last 5 years, we've really broadened our focus and really tried to cover the entire movie life cycle. So when we talk about that portfolio of brands, it's really about how do you discover movies from the time the initial trailer drops, how do you find a movie ticket and decide what movie to watch on an opening weekend, or first-run movies when they become available in the home, all the way through how you debate and discuss what was your favorite through our Rotten Tomatoes brand. So a lot going on, very excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm Jonathan Hurd. I'm a director with Altman, Vilandrie and Company. We're a strategy consulting firm focused on technology, media, and telecom. And to kick off the discussion, one of the things that I'm going to do here is show some example findings from an annual consumer video survey that we do. We use research as a means to an end as part of strategy projects, designing video services, so what combinations of programming, at what price point will appeal to consumers. And in the course of doing that work, we uncover findings that we use in our projects with clients or in situations like this where we're talking about industry trends. So with this annual consumer video survey and other custom surveys we do for clients, we cover a lot of territory about how consumers use video. And you could see all the various topics. This is a 5,000 to 10,000 some years panel that we use to understand what consumers are interested in, what they're willing to pay for. And we do some cool stuff like a conjoint analysis that quantifies how many people will adopt different services when they're in competition with each other. So new SVOD services getting launched, how many people are going to adopt those services, or how many people will adopt virtual MVPD offers. And panelists, for your benefit, I'll sort of give a little, you've seen these slides, we've talked about these before, but this is the slide, which form of video you more likely to turn to when you don't have a plan for what you're going to watch. You could see how much it varies by age range. Younger consumers go to internet-based video services, and older consumers tend to go to traditional pay TV services. And this is something that's been changing over time. Even these older consumers had, their use of online has grown, even though it's only 24% of them saying that they would turn to online video services. But it shows you, first of all, how different consumer behavior is by age range. Second, how much of an impact online video services have had and are having on what consumers decide to watch. And then how do consumers learn about new shows? Here, there's also an age-related difference to a certain extent when you get to the video services recommendations, or for example, Netflix recommendations. Whereas word of mouth are pretty high for both younger and older consumers, looking at what's on live programming. And then one of the things we did is asked the survey respondents about their effectively willingness to pay for 235 individual programs as well as sports and news. And what we find every year when we ask similar questions is that younger consumers have much broader interests than older consumers. Of the 235 programs, a little over half of them were must-have or somewhat interested for 18 to 24-year-olds. For the 55 plus, it was only 55 programs that they had any interest in and only 16 must-haves. And you'll see coming up how dense, the interest levels are of those older consumers. So the theme that you're seeing here is that when you're designing a video service or thinking about what combination of programming, it's really important to understand who your target consumer is. And because the behaviors are very different by age and other factors. And just to show, this is a very dense slide, this next one here. Whoops, let me go back. Okay, very dense. You can't read this depending on where you are, but this is all 235 programs and the percent of people that said they must have them. Those dark blue bars in the upper left are news and weather. And then you can see a few sports. The green is sports. There's one show that blue, it's Big Bang Theory, amazingly. That's in the number 4 on the list. And then the red are SVOD services. And so across everybody, this is the percent that said they must have these shows. By the way, if you give me your card, I'll send you these things if you're interested. And then, as I was saying, age is very important in understanding who your target consumer is. Look how different the 18 to 24-year-olds versus 25 to 34 versus 35 plus. 35 plus has local and national news at the top, has sports at the top, whereas the 18 to 24, the news and weather aren't even in the top 30 for them. But SVOD program, Stranger Things is number 1. By the way, this was done last summer. It could be a bit different now, and it will be when we do it this summer. And 25 to 34-year-olds, you could see news about halfway down. So the interests of consumers very different by age. And so it's very hard to design a service that will appeal to everyone. So you have to know who your target consumer is. And then even men and women in the same household have very different interests. The highlighted ones I should have mentioned are ones that don't appear in the other column. So about half of the top 30 programs are different across men and women. And very stereotypically, the men's sports tend to be among the top interest level. And for women, sports, there's NFL on there a bit further down, but you could see the SVOD services and various programs near the top. So, wanted to kick that off to stimulate the discussion, starting with understanding consumer needs and your target consumers first, and then, to now ask our panelists to tell us some of the factors that, in this building a viable OTT offer, what are the most important things to focus on? We've seen who your consumers are, who you're trying to appeal to with what programming. What are some of the other things that you need to do in order to have a viable OTT offer?
I'll start there. I think we talk a lot about content being king, and it definitely it is. But as we see all these various needs from different consumers and varying SVOD services coming to market, I think what's really important is that we understand context. And that what you may need may be very different depending on where you are, who you are, what you've done in the past, and not just on that own service. So we talk about, for example, Netflix and their recommendation service. It effectively takes into account what else you've done on Netflix. When we look at it at Fandango, I think we apply ultimately your entire movie-going history and your tastes, whether it was in theater or at home, to help us inform what we think you might like when we're streaming on Fandango Now, for example. But also you have to take into consideration, is it a weeknight? Is it a weekend? Are you looking for short form? Are you looking for long form? I know personally I don't watch, on a Wednesday, I won't watch anything over an hour and a half. It just doesn't fit into my schedule. So understanding not only who your user is, but what modality they're in. Are they looking for something they can settle into? Is it something that contextually also has to fit in with what else they've watched in the past? For example, again, we will sell Avengers tickets at a very large volume in these past several weeks. So over the 2 weeks from the time you bought that ticket to the time that you're actually seeing it in theater, your experience on Fandango Now is different. We're featuring content from the MCU. So if you want to get caught up on Infinity War, that's front and center. That might not be there if you didn't buy a ticket to Endgame. So understanding kind of the context and the modality of the shopper, in our case, since we're transactional, but of the viewer, is critically important, and going beyond just the recommendations based on what you've done on that platform.
And you vary them based on the individual, is that right?
Oh, absolutely. So, we look at it from a segmentation perspective. So certainly even a Samsung user may be very different than a Vizio user, or a Roku user may be different than an LG user. So there's a sort of a broad segmentation that you can apply right out of the gate. We also know that some people who rent movies will only rent. People who buy might be more likely to buy again in the future. So there's understanding not just the kind of content, but the format in which they like to view their content. And then, of course, again, there's the individual history, as you mentioned. But none of that, I think, can really replace the human element. So we spent a lot of time also curating what is relevant, what's culturally relevant at the time, what's new and interesting. And again, that's where sort of Rotten Tomatoes comes into play for us, and being able to surface some of the certified fresh titles you might not know about that are deep catalog. So there's absolutely a human element. I think that no matter how much automation you put into effect, you've really got to make sure that human piece is still there.
And, me as a traditional broadcaster, as we saw from the slides, my audience, and it comes down to knowing your audience, obviously, but my audience is more interested in news and weather, but they will not put up with an automated feed at all, and they don't want to see the same thing on a VOD that they see on the TV screen, which in that case, we've done studies, and it's the two anchors babbling for 30 seconds, throwing to a reporter who repeats everything the anchors just said, tells the 15-second story, then throws back to two anchors who babble again for 30 seconds. That doesn't work in a video on demand platform, so we have to work on our storytelling skills. I work with broadcasters, obviously, so I've got a lot of journalists who are natural storytellers. We've just got to work with them to bring that out. Skewing older as we do, the other things we got to remember is a lot of things that to us and to the younger generation are automatic, we know, we understand. My audience doesn't, so we have to make sure the interfaces are simple, discovery is there. You know, if they've been following this story, you know, news is horrible. If they've been following this story about the murdered kids, they're going to want to keep seeing those updates, so we have to curate that back to them. And then, and as Greg said, curation is incredibly important. Again, we skew older, so a lot of our popular categories are archives. You know, I've got TV stations going back to the 50s that have basements full of archival footage that played very well with an older generation. And so we have, but not if you just throw it up there. Curation is incredibly important.
For us to get back into, I think, how we really think about, how more broadly I think about building it in OTT, and then to touch on a little bit what XUMO has done, we really focus on quality content, so 160 different partners that we have. But it's really important for us to enable to, in order to enable some of the experiences that Greg was highlighting, is to really focus on the content quality of the metadata that comes along with it. You can craft, I think we can craft really good algorithms and really good, really focused experiences, contextually aware of what day, time, and whatever else. But it's, you know, especially for our world, it's inside of XUMO, where we're aggregating a lot of discrete VOD content and trying to transform that into something that feels very traditional. If the metadata doesn't match, I can't promote or create a Mother's Day playlist to feature and try to drive audience because I wouldn't know. So we have to work really closely with content partners to unlock that. So that's a really key component of how, you know, if you've worked with different content partners in the past, the quality of the metadata, and I think some of the winners in the space are really, you know, are really centered around that, the quality of the information that comes along with the individual content. And then, as you were mentioning, building a simple UI, it sounds very intuitive and easy. It's one of the hardest things to do, to try to put the right things in front of the users at any given time. Our partnership with LG allows us to do some things where we have access to lower level APIs on the actual television itself. We can use functions on the actual remote control to drive experiences. So we have off-platform, outside of our app experience, promotional units that we wouldn't have access to otherwise. Stuff that's been created specifically for our service that's inside of the LG Smart TV. So working really closely with not only the manufacturer in the case of our partnership with LG, but even more broadly speaking, just to really know what is the most important navigational UI element that can be, you know, surfaced for a user at the right time to drive them into a place that they can then have some sort of habit. They know that when they go to this discovery section, that it's generally going to welcome them in with something that's contextually aware and really useful for them at that time. And then finally, the thing that is a monetization strategy. And since we're an advertising-supported business, we've really leaned into that and really adopted that as our main mantra. We've flirted with the ideas of going to transactional VOD to thinking about SVOD, but we've doubled down on completely ad-supported, completely free, easy to use. More broadly speaking, I think just that commitment to your monetization strategy is incredibly important as you think about building an OTT offering, because if you are swayed or you try to do too much, you really run the risk of complete market confusion. Your users don't know what tier they're on. Do I get ads? Do I not get ads? How much premium stuff do I have access to? So I think that's a very fine distinction to make in order to stay successful.
One of the things that you mentioned is with the LG platform, you can do different things. And Greg, you were talking about maybe the Samsung user has some different behaviors from the Vizio user. How do you balance, when you're creating a service, how do you balance the desire for consistency? Like if I'm a consumer, I would expect XUMO on one device to be relatively similar to another one. On the other hand, if you want to take advantage of the device and the modality, you would want to adapt. So how do you do that? How do you make those decisions of, are we going to customize for this platform and use these specific features, or are we going to have consistency?
Yeah, for us at XUMO, we take the approach of it depends on which business vertical that it falls into. So we have basically 3 distinct business units that we operate. Our white label or native enterprise business, so that's what our LG services. So it's called LG Channel Plus. In the future, it'll be called LG Channels, thanks to copyright law. That's great. So they'll change the name on us. But it's powered by XUMO. So it's a white label experience. So we're actually the underlying platform that does all of the legwork, brings all the content, does all of the ad strategy and monetization, and actually builds the front end for it. With that, because LG wants us to build them a custom experience, they'll open access to things like the remote control, as I was mentioning, or we're integrated into their native guide interface, into their actual electronic programming guide. So right next to the over-the-air channels, probably some of yours, depending on which market, are our digital channels starting from channel 100 all the way up to 199. We bucket them more traditionally, like with sports, with comedy, with news, entertainment, so on and so forth. And because of that level of access, it only makes sense to customize to the platform. And because it's white labeled, then LG is incentivized to actually help us co-market and bring an audience, because it's all a partnership. Whereas on our owned and operated, it is more of a traditional, let's try to make it as unique and similar as we possibly can. So on Samsungs, on Vizios, on Panasonic TVs, we all look the same.
Got it.
And that helps us to keep it, it's all the same underpinning, it's all the same architecture powering each instance, but you do have to wear multiple design thinking hats for, this is what works here when it's natively built into the device, here's what is more of a traditional, let me just build the front end and use the architecture to power it.
And then Greg, on the, for example, Samsung versus Vizio user being different,
Sure.
is it more the user or the modality? Like, I might have a Samsung
Yeah.
in one room of the Samsung TV, in one room of the house of Vizio, another room or something, and
Yeah, we see all sorts of overlaps, and particularly with mobile to living room. So we have a lot of users, whether they're using a Samsung or an LG or Vizio or a Sony Bravia. Obviously, they also use our service on their mobile device. So we need to make sure that we're fitting the user experience to what's best suited for that device. So everything that we do for Fandango now on iOS and Android is about what you do on the go. So it's about taking it offline, being able to watch while you're on an airplane, really focusing on SD and HD and not so much 4K, of course. So we look at the use case for why somebody is on device A versus device B, whether they are using another device informs us what to do on the second device. But for consistency, we do want to make sure that if you have an LG in the living room and a Samsung, in the bedroom, that it's a consistent experience. We may, again, modify certain things if one is a 4K TV, if another is HDR enabled and the other is not. So there may be some merchandising and curation that is a little bit unique to the setting. But ultimately, we're looking for what is the best experience on any given device for how you choose to use that device.
got it. And you all mentioned curation and the importance of metadata in being able to curate. Rob, there was an interesting story you told me before about that archive and the power of curating the archive and suggesting programs. There was a Tom Seaver interview, for example, and it struck me that story is great, and maybe you could tell it, but also, is there metadata in these deep archives that you have that allows you to do that?
I'm talking about a TV station from 1952 where they just threw a tape down in the basement, so the metadata is whatever's written on the cover of the box. But what we have found, and I mentioned it a little bit in my last comment, was that archival footage, if it's curated properly, does better than news, weather, sports on our platforms that we provide. 21 of my 42 TV stations have connected devices, not OTT, we can't call it that because my company gets mad, have connected devices, which would be Roku, Amazon Fire, Android TV, and who's that company we talked about for 10 minutes? Apple. And what we have found, we're lucky enough in the station I'm talking about is our New York station, just up here on 39th Street. We're lucky enough that our web producer there considers himself a retroologist, so he really gets into this preserving the past of his TV station. But it's not just going down into the basement. And this basement, I mean, it's something out of medieval horror times, and it's leaking water, and it's barely lit. I think there's one light bulb, old Edison bulb, hanging down, and it's full of tape that is, tape. It's slowly disintegrating. It's being destroyed. And he tries to go down and get as much of it archived as possible, or digitized as possible, and then he does the metadata for it. So that your example was Tom Seaver got some kind of an award. So the lead story in the archival category on all 4 platforms was a Tom Seaver video from the 80s. And he's really good about knowing, okay, what's going on now, especially if if a celebrity passes away. This is Pix, this is a big station in New York. They've interviewed him at some time or another. So he will go through what he's got digitized, and see if he can find stories from when that celebrity was on the morning show or on the night shows, or even in the news if they did something bad in their career. And if he can't find it in what he's already got digitized, then he'll actually go down and spend hours in this basement fighting off the rats and the other things that occupy the Daily Planet building. Goes to Christopher Reeve, whatever, in case you're wondering what I'm referencing there, the original movie Superman was filmed in our building up here on 39th Street.
Oh
We
my
call it
gosh.
the Daily Planet because that's what was in the movie, and the globe's still in the lobby and everything. So, but he'll go down there and just the very rudimentary cataloging system that he has and find something that pertains to the news that day. So that's very important, and our station Pix does very well with the archival footage. We were lucky enough, Pix was the station that originated the Yule log back in the 50s or 60s, and it was filmed at the New York mayor's mansion and then promptly lost. So what you grew up watching, well, I grew up watching whatever they threw out on the stations, was actually a redone version of it, and they weren't allowed to go to the funny story just to go along with it. They weren't allowed to do it at the mayor's mansion because when they did it before the fire started, the fires kicked out an ember onto the carpet that was worth like millions of dollars, and they weren't allowed to go back to the mayor's office. But anyway, they found the original film in a cameraman's attic who had passed away, and his wife was throwing stuff away, and she found stuff that said just Pix Christmas on it. Rolando got that, digitized it, and we don't, as a company, we don't push a lot of stuff, but Pix used to be known as the holiday station and the original Yule log. So every year, that's when we buy ads for Discovery and everything, and the Yule log, the original Yule log that was filmed at the mayor's mansion, easily is their #1 video every year, and it's only available from Thanksgiving to New Year's. I turn it on and turn it off, the entire category, and that just blows them up every year, so.
Wow.
And
Well,
if he wouldn't have curated it, that was a long-winded way. Curation's important.
yes, and very manual, it
And
sounds
manual,
like,
yeah,
yes.
you brought it up, human touch. You
Yeah.
gotta have the human touch.
Wow.
Especially, like I said, when we're dealing with older generation, they see a computer algorithm right off the bat and want nothing to do with it. So to us, the human touch is very important.
One way that we get around that, so we have, thousands of hours of archival content from the different content partners. And for more ephemeral stations like news, weather, sports, they're pumping us full of so much new stuff that you don't need to go back to a game highlight from, ACC basketball 2 seasons ago. That's never going to come back on and be a success for our ACC Digital Network partnership. However, we have a series of content partners that do have like evergreen, deep catalog stuff that will always make sense. So we do a combination of looking back, rolling 60, 90 days or more, evaluate what was good, and then resurface that running through business rules with very light human touch. So we have a small, tightly organized operations team that will actually allow previously popular content to recycle in and program the channel in such a way that we actually see engagement spikes since we've done that, depending on the channel in order of magnitude 20-30%. So when we've made changes like that, that's been super relevant, super contextually very helpful. It makes the content partner happy because, as we heard, if you were in the previous session, one of the content creators who was up here, they just want their content to be seen. They spent a lot of money to create it. They are very proud of it. If it has a nice window of run, that's great. But if we have access to it, we'd certainly like to resurface it, whether that be in the linear experience or in our VOD discovery environment.
And we have similar challenges, again, about how to surface the right content. And I think about one of the more popular lists that we always see on Fandango now it comes from Rotten Tomatoes. It's what we call our fresh picks. And I touched on it earlier, but it's how we surface deep catalog. And we've got 80,000 titles to choose from. It's the Netflix conundrum, right? How do you find what's relevant to you quickly? And we use the human element for that in trying to surface the right content. But Rotten Tomatoes is an interesting element of our business in that it not only provides what critics think, but what audiences think. It gives us the opportunity even to expose it to what your friends thought. We saw earlier word of mouth, particularly with a particular age range is still how we find content. So we surface that again through a more of a social mechanism by way of Rotten Tomatoes. So how you surface what critics loved, what audiences loved, what your friends love, I think is a really important part of making any OTT service relevant for what's attractive to an individual.
And we're talking a lot about discovery and recommendations. What about search? How does that come into play in your environments?
Well, for us, it's huge. Obviously, oftentimes people come to Fandango, whether it's Fandango or Fandango Now. Well, let me back up a little bit. There's a challenge in our industry around consumers understanding windowing, right? Mm-hmm. So the studios don't make that very easy for any of us to understand if a movie is available in theaters, is available at home. If I turn on Netflix, will I get it? Is it only available to buy, to rent? Mm-hmm. So it's challenging. So one of the primary goals that I have for my team at Fandango is to make that really simple. So I look back at Oscar time, for example. Our consumers don't necessarily know, can I still see this in theaters? I want to look at all the Best Picture nominees. So at Fandango, we make all of those titles available. Some are in theaters, some are available at home. And search is a critical element of that. So just being able to drive an individual to the right place to consume your content is huge. And oftentimes people come to our platform knowing what they want to see. Oftentimes they don't, and we help them find the right content as well. But search is huge.
I was hoping that Greg would go first because I knew that ours would be different. Because when you really lean into a linear experience like we do with 160 channels, search is, it's interesting because you might say, I'd like to find maybe a channel, or maybe you do know that we have an asset movie title or TV show in a back catalog. But more often than not, people are leaning into, I know what channel I want to go to, or, and this happens at a rate that may or may not shock you on our LG platform, over 75% of our navigation is through channel up, channel down. I mean, it's the full circle, the what's old is new again, where people are actually just, I'll find something. Or they can enter in the actual numbers on their remote keypad and jump to that location. I know that I like Fox Sports. I will go to channel 740 and watch Fox Sports. I know that I need to just have something on in the background to calm everybody down. I'm going to go to 452 and watch Amoeba Kids and just let my kids enjoy some programming that's appropriate for them. So although we are evaluating how to make search a little bit better on our platform, we really don't see it as a huge indicator, a huge driver. We're going to invest in it later this year with the series of initiatives, but to date, because we're not a YouTube, we don't aggregate the world's breadth of content. I don't want to actually position ourselves to compete because I've always been a believer that bad search is worse than no search. Mm-hmm. I'd rather have you, be presented, trust us that we're going to curate and program to you, and then do some exploration on our linear channel experience, not search for something like Endgame and have maybe a clip talking about, when it's going to be released from Mashable 2 weeks ago. That's not as contextually relevant necessarily. And there are so many services that do that incredibly, incredibly well. And so we position ourselves slightly differently from that perspective.
Yeah. And then the concept of a channel versus programs. I think one thing that's happened in TV viewing in general is that channels have lost a bit of their importance for having consumers decide what they're going to watch. People tend to think of a program and they don't even know what channel it's on necessarily, at least through a live TV service. To create a new channel, which is what you guys do and curate, how do you even make people aware of it, position it? Like, is that an effort in itself to create an actual channel?
It most certainly is. I think where we've had almost all of our success is really leaning into it being brand first. So we don't aggregate anybody into like a, action TV or blended. So we'll let you be out there as your own content brand first. So we referenced in the previous panel, Funny or Die has their own channel. It's not inside of XUMO Comedy. It's aggregated into a genre, but you can find a Funny or Die channel. You can find, a Sports Illustrated channel. It's right next to our PGA Tour relationship that we have. So things are aggregated together into genres, which help. And then we have all sorts of levers that we can pull, whether it be inside of our owned and operated platform for marketing to try to drive audience and awareness, or we work really closely with our manufacturer partners where we have native integrations, and they help us really try to drive audience. Because just like consumers, those guys get really excited about great new content partnerships, and they'll help us figure out a strategy of let's get this in front of the right people at the right time, be it via notification, better marketing on their web properties, through social media, however it might be.
Got it. So the panel's about how to build a viable OTT offer. Maybe we could change the name viable to successful. What would you, what success metrics do you each use to measure, hey, are we being successful? Are we improving? What do you look at?
Well, with us, we're, again, broadcasters, we're different. Unfortunately, sales still drives way too much. So sales' definition of success is much different than mine, which is much different than my web producers. Sales, it's all about how many pre-rolls were shown and were they locally sold or programmatic. And they base that on how many hours were watched, and they have their own algorithms that make absolutely zero sense. And then, but my web producer or I, it's okay, what's resonating, how many times is it being opened, how long are people staying in the app, how many stories are they watching? I'm a broadcaster, my stories are usually a minute and a half long. If somebody comes in for a minute and a half and out, I know they watched one story and it wasn't really a success for us. If they come in and average time spent in apps 30 minutes, 45 minutes, that means they were finding content. We were doing something right. We kept them in the app, which meant we were doing our jobs to inform and to serve the community and the public.
Yeah, and from our perspective at Fandango, both Fandango and Fandango Now are transactional services. So we obsess about how do we get conversion to its optimal place. Try to make it as simple as possible to get to the showtime or get to the movie that you want to buy or rent as quickly and easily as possible, check out as quickly and easily as possible. But we also know that movie planning is not something that happens in one session. So when we look at ticketing, for example, on Fandango, people might come in on a Thursday morning to plan their weekend. So on that Thursday morning session, our KPIs are very much engagement focused. How do I get you to plan your weekend? How do I get you to watch maybe 2 or 3 trailers? How do I get you to share with friends some showtimes that might be interesting for the weekend? The same is true in VOD. So we know Tuesday mornings, the new releases come out. People are planning their weekend. So our communications around a Tuesday are very different than they are on a Friday. So engagement, so that we can get to a transaction, even if it's in a separate session, is critically important.
Yeah, and again, because we're AVOD, no account, no subscription, ours is all about total time watched and monthly active users and growth scale. With both of those, the monetization just naturally follows. So our programmatic and our direct sales team, they can monetize as only as far as our growth story and our engagement story can take us. So we've actually changed recently from more of an obsession about average session time or average usage to a total time watched metric across our business. Reason being is we're doing campaigns where we were seeing maybe 60 seconds or less of usage, but at a higher clip, right? So we're spending dollars, we're getting people, but we're planting a seed, maybe they'll come back. We want to do a lifetime analysis on what that spend was. But on the other end, we're getting hours of consumption. But the campaign can still be a success if that total time watch metric lifts the tide. So we're really focused on those two things, and the monetization part. Although I have some of my sales friends in the back of the room, they might slightly differ with my perspective here. But I think the more that we do with our engagement and our growth story, again, the easier that job becomes for them.
Great.
And he just brought up that there's salespeople in the room, so I need to change my story. It makes no sense to me because I don't think like a salesperson does, but I'm sure it makes perfect sense to them.
All right. Questions from the audience? Anyone? Yes.
I'm just curious about what you think the future is for aspect ratio.
Future of aspect ratio.
Because a lot of our content creators, we're from the UN, they're creating stories in Square.
Yeah.
And that's causing a challenge for us because we have 16 by 9.
Yeah.
And
Tell you.
16 by 9. So I'm just curious.
My standpoint as a broadcaster, again, a traditional broadcaster, we've always been 4 by 3 or 16 by 9. So my engineers, my producers, drives them nuts to see Square video. On digital, for the longest time, we were saying, don't turn your camera, turn your camera, turn your camera. And then we spent about a year saying, Square's fine. And 6 months ago, we went back to turn your camera, turn your camera. So I think I see, and there's numbers that show there's better engagement with Square video.
Will people turn their TVs this way?
Yeah, and that was something we brought up the other day. We made a joke about, it was LG or one of the new
Samsung,
manufacturers
yeah.
has made a TV
Yeah.
you can turn.
Yeah.
And we were just laughing about it on our internal channels, but at least from our standpoint, it changes. As traditional broadcasters, we want to see 16 by 9. That's what our brains are trained to think. And so if I'm going through Facebook personally, a Square video, I laugh at it or I huff off on it, or scofflaw, I guess is the word I'm saying, because we train our journalists to do 16 by 9. But I think in the future, it's probably going to go Square.
Yeah, we see a lot of that ourselves, mostly with our Rotten Tomatoes brand. So we have a huge following in social. And when we put the wide aspect ratio videos up on social, they get engagement at a fraction of the rate of what we see when we go either vertical or square. So we're now working with studios to start producing more vertical video. It's been a real challenge to get that when we're talking about trailers or we're talking about promotional content, being able to get that surfaced. But we're seeing significantly more engagement depending on the device. So it goes back to my previous statement around delivering for the individual device. We're going to be rolling out on Fandango now in the third quarter in living room an IMAX version of movies. So now we're taking aspect ratio and going the other direction and trying to capture the aspect ratio that's going into the IMAX camera and delivering that at home with better audio and everything else. So again, it depends on the device and the use case, but we see a huge future for square and for vertical.
Do you think broadcast will go to a Square?
Broadcast will never go Square. And there's a lot of reasons for that, mainly because cinematographers, which you guys work with, and photojournalists and journalists are trained from a very young age to go horizontal. TVs are horizontal, although there's the new one that can flip now. If broadcast goes square, it's a long ways down the road because you have to get rid of all the old timers like me that won't let square go out on TV.
Yeah, I just noticed that, there was a show on Amazon with Julia Roberts. I don't know if anybody caught that one.
Homecoming.
Where they depicted the future of Square.
Yeah.
So I thought
Maybe
it was
we-
interesting.
Maybe we could squeeze in one more question. Yes.
Hi, question for you guys. So in the context of building a viable OTT offer, where do you guys see or how much importance do you give to providing multi-language support in the products that you guys create, whether it be for a
Importance of multi-language support.
Yeah, as someone who just launched 6 countries 2 weeks ago, I can speak to that. We really look at it with 2 lenses. So the interface and the actual experience needs to be custom for that language. So whatever, in our case, whatever device you're using and whatever language setting that is set to, that needs to be context aware and provide you the right language. So if you're in Spain, it should be in Spanish. If you're in Canada, it should be in English, but you should have the option to change to French if you're in the Quebec area. And then we're currently live only with English supported content in those markets, but it's a fast follow approach for us to try to add local content that will be very much relevant to the users in that market. And then the further challenge that we have to address is subtitling. So with English language content, how can we better provide an experience for a foreign audience that still wants to enjoy that the content that we're providing there, but in a way that will be more enjoyable. And there's a lot of, I think, mixed reaction that we get from the concept of dubbing that we've heard. Dubbing seems to get a lot of hesitancy. So a lot of people would prefer to hear it in the natural language with subtitles. And so we're investigating all of those. I don't think that we will have a rocket ship success story until we check all of those boxes.
Well, thank you all for attending, and please join me in thanking our panelists.